When we think of monsters, we usually picture something hiding under the bed, right? But the terrifying reality is that across America, the real monsters walk right down our streets. They leave behind these trails of absolute devastation, and then, sometimes they just completely vanish into the night. Today, we are stepping straight into the shadows of America's most haunting unsolved murders. Throughout this explainer, we're going to look at these sprawling, incredibly complex cases where the truth is probably still out there, just hiding slightly out of reach. We all like to think that justice eventually catches up with the guilty, that the system works. But the deeply chilling reality? Some people commit the absolute darkest acts imaginable and just slip right through our fingers.
Now, before we really dive in, I need to make one thing absolutely clear. These are not campfire stories, okay? They aren't urban legends made up to give you a quick thrill. These are real cases. We're talking about shattered families, detectives who spent their entire careers completely baffled, and whole communities forever changed by this overwhelming sense of fear. And here's the craziest part. Despite massive, years-long manhunts, despite literally thousands of tips pouring in, and even with the absolute cutting-edge DNA technology we have today, these terrifying murders remain completely unsolved. No one has ever been convicted.
So, picture this. Los Angeles, January 15, 1947. A local mom named Betty Bersinger is just taking a walk with her young daughter past this vacant lot in Limerick Park. Out of the corner of her eye, she spots something in the weeds. At first, she literally thinks it's just a broken, discarded store mannequin, but as she steps closer, she makes this horrifying realization. It's a human being. And that single moment kicks off a chain of events that would completely paralyze the city of LA and launch an investigation so disturbing we are still trying to unravel it today.
The victim they found in that empty lot was a 22-year-old woman named Elizabeth Short. But you probably know her by the name the press gave her, the Black Dahlia. It was this dark nod to her striking dark hair and sheer clothing. Now, when police rolled up to the scene, they weren't just looking at a typical homicide. They were met with this macabre, incredibly deliberate display. I mean, the sheer, calculated precision of the crime scene baffled even the most hardened detectives. It wasn't random violence. It was completely staged. And almost overnight, the horrifying nature of what happened to her turned into one of the absolute biggest and most sensationalized murder investigations in American history.
To put the scale of this manhunt into perspective, investigators directly interviewed over 150 suspects. They were literally combing through the darkest, grittiest corners of Los Angeles, trying to find just one thread of truth. But the media frenzy got so intense, it whipped the public into such a panic that something deeply bizarre happened. Amidst all the chaos, dozens of people actually walked right into police stations and confessed to a gruesome crime they didn't even commit. You had attention seekers, habitual liars, all claiming to be the monster the city was hunting for.
But here is the terrifying realization that quickly set in for those detectives. Every single one of those confessions, they completely fall apart. See, the true killer had done something uniquely sinister. They withheld specific, grotesque details about the crime scene that literally only they would know. So detectives used those secrets to test the people confessing, and not a single one could actually verify their claims. Imagine being in that precinct, right? The frustration must have been unbearable. The real killer is out there breathing the same air while all these false leads are just clogging up the system. Retired detectives and journalists have spent decades grasping at shadows, but the true perpetrator just slipped away.
And that brings us to this timeline. From that horrifying morning in 1947, we trace this agonizing path through literally decades of dead ends and desperate theories. Just let this sink in for a second. Nearly 80 years later, Elizabeth Short's killer has never been identified. That dark shadow they cast over the glamorous, golden age veneer of LA, it's still there. The Black Dahlia case is this permanent scar on American true crime, an enduring, creepy reminder that yes, monsters can and do get away with it. All right, let's leave the post-war glamour of LA and head north, the San Francisco Bay Area, the late 1960s. The tension in California absolutely skyrockets because a phantom killer starts stalking lovers' lanes, deliberately targeting young couples in the pitch dark. The atmosphere was just suffocating. People were literally terrified to leave their houses at night. But what made this case so uniquely terrifying wasn't just the brutal, random violence. It was the insane psychological warfare this killer waged on the public immediately after. Because this killer, he absolutely refused to just lurk in the shadows. He actively watched the police scramble, and he decided, you know what? I'm stepping into the spotlight. He started openly taunting the authorities. He demanded attention with this brazen, terrifying ego, and he actually gave himself a name that still gives people shivers today, the Zodiac. He wasn't just a murderer. He was styling himself as this architect of terror, playing a deadly, twisted game with law enforcement, totally on his own terms.
He essentially weaponized the media to cause mass panic. Instead of hiding, he mailed letters directly to local newspapers. And to prove he was the real deal, he included horrific mementos like blood-stained scraps of his victims' clothing. No joke, he filled pages with these strange, cryptic symbols and complex ciphers explicitly threatening school buses and entire communities. He wanted the whole world to know exactly what he was capable of. He managed to hold the entire Bay Area hostage with nothing more than a pen, some paper, and a reign of pure terror.
And that psychological warfare left us with a truly infuriating puzzle. Now, amateur cryptographers did famously manage to crack his initial 408-symbol cipher, which gave us a really dark look into his twisted motives. But as you can see here, other messages remain a complete mystery to this day. Decades of FBI scrutiny, supercomputers, the brightest code-breaking minds in the world, all hitting a brick wall. Take the famous 340 cipher. It took half a century to finally decode, and it just gave us more taunts instead of a name. Crucial clues to his identity are likely still locked inside those unsolved codes, deliberately designed to outlive him. The frustration surrounding this is just staggering. I mean, police had prime suspects, guys whose lives were totally torn apart by the investigation, but the physical evidence just would never quite fit. Fingerprints didn't match, DNA was either inconclusive or degraded. Even after decades of nonstop searching, law enforcement has never been able to announce a definitive match. The Zodiac just faded away. He stopped sending his letters just as mysteriously as he started them, leaving us with one of the most agonizing unanswered questions in criminal history.
So these two sprawling cases, the Black Dahlia and the Zodiac, they serve as a really chilling reminder. Even armed with thousands of hours of meticulous police work, the brightest minds, and full federal resources, we don't always get answers. Sometimes the shadows win. But this final mystery we're going to look at, it strips away the sensational headlines of serial killers and dark, vacant lots. It brings the horror right out of the distant past and straight into a quiet family home, reminding us of a very, very different kind of terror.
We're talking about a young child, a quiet, affluent, super safe suburban community right in the middle of the holidays, and a devastating mystery that completely fractured a local police department and divided the entire nation. It became this fierce, ongoing debate, right? On one hand, you have this terrifying theory of a brazen intruder slipping into a secure home in the dead of night. On the other, the unthinkable, harrowing alternative of violence coming from the inside. It's a case where literally every piece of evidence seems to completely contradict the last, trapping the truth in an endless loop of speculation. Because the monsters aren't always stalking lovers' lanes or mailing cryptic letters to major newspapers. Sometimes the lack of answers is infinitely more agonizing because the tragedy is just so completely intimate. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this really unsettling thought. It's one thing when a phantom killer stalks the dark city streets, but what happens when the mystery hits perfectly, terrifyingly